Chapter 18, Something Borrowed, Something Blue. Solfalena, 337 solar year. At 1 p.m. the bells of the chapel sounded off once more. On the front stage, in the center of the room, was the Queen's brother Ishan. As oracle, he had the duty of officiating the royal wedding ceremony. Just behind the stage were two gold-encrusted thrones. In the larger one, sat Queen Elemark in all her glory, beauty, and majesty. The smaller throne beside her was still empty for the moment. Standing beside Ishan on the left was Marcus Godwin and one of his friends, a fellow nobleman, from Stormfist, acting as his best man. To Ishan's right was an empty spot where Syra would soon be standing, and slightly to the right of that spot stood Alinda. And just as Rose had predicted, from the moment she had taken the stage in her new gorgeous pink gown and stylish curly hair, she had become the absolute center of attention. All the men in attendance immediately gazed at her in awe. Many of the single women sitting in the crowd could be heard by Laszlo as they were whispering about her dress, how gorgeous she looked, and how they wished they could look that elegant. In addition, many of the married noble women could be heard scolding their husbands for ogling and staring too much at her. A court member opened wide the two large chapel doors that divided the sanctuary from the main hall. Two musicians with trumpets walked into the room dressed in all the pomp and ceremony one may expect on such a day and blew their trumpets loud. The music filled and echoed throughout the whole room. Everyone arose to their feet. Next, a royal page now stepped through the doors. He unrolled an official-looking scroll and read from it. He proclaimed in a very loud voice that boomed throughout the whole chapel, "Noble ladies and lords, may I have your attention, please? It is my honor to introduce to you the oldest daughter of Queen Elemark and commander of the Queen's Knights, Aelin Ethelbald. Her Majesty the next Queen of Falena, Princess Syra Falenas, who is being escorted by her father, Master Ethelbald." With that proclamation now over, musicians and a choir could be heard playing the national anthem of Falena as the father and daughter entered the room. As they slowly made their way to the front of the stage, every eye was on them. And as they passed by each row, people bowed or curtsied before them. Once they reached the front of the room, the oracle spoke up, as silence once more overtook the crowd, "Who gives this woman to marry this man?" Aelin replied in an equally loud voice, "Her mother, Queen Elemark, and I." With that Aelin turned to his daughter, kissed her on the cheek, and then proceeded up the stage to sit on his throne next to his wife. Ishan began the service. Many elegant words were spoken by the oracle per the marriage customs of Falena. Vows were, also, exchanged by Marcus and Syra. Next, they exchanged rings. At last, Ishan moved into the final words of the ceremony, "By the power of the Sun Rune, and by the authority entrusted to me by Her Majesty, Queen Elemark, the Sun's vicegerent, and as the Oracle of Holy Lunas, I now proclaim you husband and wife. Lord Godwin, you may kiss your bride and our next queen." Lifting her veil, Godwin looked at his new wife. That same surge of excitement he had felt that night she snuck into his room suddenly came upon him. Thus, in a rare display of emotion, he pulled her close and, bending her back a little bit, he planted a huge passionate kiss upon her lips. The whole crowd cheered and yelled in celebration. Alinda clapped, but looked away as she felt slightly awkward by the whole thing. While everyone cheered for her sister, she was actually wondering about something else. She was thinking about the unanswered question she had asked Syra last night. Which was, did Syra love Godwin? And if the answer was no, which she thought it probably was, given how her sister had avoided responding to it. However, now she understood as she looked around the room as the couple made their way to the balcony overlooking the whole city, to which she could hear applauses and shouts even louder coming from the common citizens outside who had gathered around waiting to see the newlywed couple for themselves at the chapel's high terrace overlooking the city. Yes, she understood as she watched them waving happily to the crowd with big smiles on their faces. Soon her mother and father, also, joined them and waved to the thousands outside in the city streets. It didn't matter if she loved Godwin or not. She loved Falena. So, As the oldest daughter and the next queen, Syra would do whatever it took to ensure the Queendom's survival. That was her duty as the firstborn. Alinda began to wonder, had she been the oldest, would she have been able to do what Syra did? Even if she didn't love or hardly know this man, Marcus Godwin. They arrived at the docks with a few minutes to spare. Robert sent Duncan to scout ahead and spy on the situation. Leaving their horses a few dozen yards behind them, they made their way closer to the warehouse and took cover behind some crates and barrels. "All right, what is this plan of yours, Rose?" insisted Robert. Rose, however, didn't answer right away, as she was busy unfastening the clasps on her queen's knight's armor. Once it was off, she unzipped the back of her uniform and her skirt, letting them both fall to the ground. Now just standing there in her bra and panties, Robert and Clark couldn't help but stand there and stare at this half-naked redhead before them. She ignored them as she was wrestling through the bag she had brought with her from the palace. Finally, lifting up her head for a moment, she yelled, "Geez, you men are all alike. Doesn't matter what country you're from, does it? What does a girl have to do to get a little privacy? Turn around." Now embarrassed, the two men did so and moved around the corner. Just then Duncan returned from spying through a back window of the warehouse and told Robert and Clark what he saw. "It's like what the little bookworm said. There are a few guys inside guarding Desmond. He's tied up in a chair in the northwest corner, a little bruised, but he seems okay for now. Also, there are about a dozen guys in the front guarding the only door to the place." "So, what's this plan?" Duncan asked. The three men turned back around as they could hear Rose was now done fidgeting around with whatever it was she was doing. They turned the corner to see their warrior, but it wasn't her. Suddenly, Robert in shock said, "Princess Alinda. What are you doing here? Wait a minute. You're not Rose, is that you? Like my little disguise?" she said with a smirk of satisfaction on her face. "I think this will be enough to fool the likes of those creeps. At least long enough to catch them off guard and rescue Desmond." Rose stood before them in one of Alinda's favorite blue dresses. It was very well made and extremely regal looking. It was a bit small on Rose and it looked a little tight, since she had a more athletic figure than Alinda. However, to any normal person looking at her, all they would notice is that this dress belongs to a very rich woman. Nevertheless, the real seller was the long-haired platinum-colored wig she was wearing. This hair color was unique in the Queendom. Only the royal family had it. No other family in the nation had that same color of hair, but them. Yet, here was Rose with a wig that was so well colored. It perfectly matched the platinum hair of the royal family. "Where did you get that?" asked Robert. Rose putting on a cloak and hood to cover most of her face, but purposely leaving most of the fake hair exposed by pulling it to the sides of her face and then into the front, replied, "Alinda has this big plush doll. It's not important. Look, there isn't much time left. Listen, here is what we are going to do." Meanwhile, inside the warehouse, Desmond was forced to watch this man named Woz pace back and forth in the room as though he were waiting for something. Desmond, finally realizing what that something was, started speaking in a casual and friendly way. "So, quite nice little place you got here. Not exactly cozy, but to each their own, I suppose." "Shut up, you filthy foreigner," demanded the oddly dressed man. "You think you can just come into my country and demand whatever you want?" "Demand? I've demanded nothing from you except that which is mine. That is to say those cufflinks." He gestured with his eyes to the man's wrist. Woz looked down and smirked. "I had one of my men retrieved them from your room this morning. I knew you'd come for them. You rich noble politicians are all alike no matter what country you're from. All you care about is money and power. Gold and silver." He ripped off the silver cufflinks and threw them at the restrained man's chair next to his feet. "You rich fops don't give a damn about the people, the starving or the poor. The poor people you help make poorer by your high taxes and the pointless wars you start. Wars that leave our sons dead on some battlefield. While you sit safe in your bloody mansions attending your stupid parties and balls. Barrows, Godwin, Ethelbald. All of them alike. Scum. Now you foreigners come to our country to add even more to the greed and corruption. Well, I say. No. This country needs purged and purified from all you, noble, trash. This way Her Majesty, Queen Elamark can finally rule in peace and do what is right for the people and not a corrupt Senate or some evil foreign nation. Sonny, Desmond said, you need help. I can help you. I know the Queen. If you let me go, I can talk to her for you about this corruption. I am sure she would be willing to make things right. Suddenly, wedding bells could be heard off in the distance. Wrong, old man. Hear that? Those bells. That means your time is up. You heard what I said before. No princess by 1 p.m., so now no freedom for you. And unlike you damn politicians, I keep my promises. With this he withdrew a knife from his side and approached the helpless old man. There was a loud commotion coming from outside. One voice from the exterior cracked the door and yelled in, "Hey boss, they're here. They're really here. A real Queen's Knight, and there is a well-dressed woman with him." Woz smiled, "Looks like you get to live. For now." He then told the 4 remaining thugs, who were still in the room, "Watch him. I'll be right back." Their boss walked out the front of the door into the midst of his dozen hired goons. There before him to his great surprise was indeed a Queen's Knight in his full black and gold uniform and his halberd in hand. Next to him was a beautiful woman in an elegant and very expensive blue dress. She wore a black cloak over that, which covered most of her face, but he could clearly see her unique and fully recognizable platinum hair. Indeed, this was a member of the royal family, as every Falaner knew what that color of hair meant. He couldn't believe it. Well, Lady Syra, Woz said, "I can't believe you were willing to give up your wedding to save this old foreign dog. Have the once great and mighty Falaners family really fallen so far? Son, help us all. Well, let's get this over with. Come over here. Once you give yourself up, we'll let the old man go. I give you my word." She started to walk slowly toward the group of men. "My lady, wait, you don't have to do this. There has to be a better way," yelled Robert, reaching out to grab her hand. The woman said nothing, she merely put up her other hand, gesturing to him not to stop her. The knight let go and she walked on. Sobs and sniffling could now be heard coming from under the cloak. Now, my dear princess, no need to cry. You'll be perfectly safe with us. Besides, I know you'd never want to marry a corrupt fool like that Godwin guy anyhow," retorted Woz with a clear look of triumph on his face. The woman's faint moaning now turned into ailing as she cried louder, seemingly heartbroken over missing out on her big wedding day. Without warning, there was a loud crash. It sounded like glass breaking, and now the clear sounds of battle could be heard inside the warehouse. A look of shock, anger, and confusion came over the oddly dressed man's face. He looked back at the room and then at the princess. Robert drew his weapon and was charging at them. Though he quickly stopped, when Woz grabbed the weeping woman with one hand and drew his knife with the other to her neck. He ordered a few of his dozen men to go check on Desmond and the others. The woman screamed in fright. Feeling as though he had regained the upper hand, Woz began taunting the knight, daring him to make a move. Robert stood there perfectly still, watching the 10 men and the one with the knife very carefully, waiting for his moment. His weapon at the ready. More sounds of battle could be heard within the building, then there was silence. The crazy knife wielder laughed with delight. "Sounds like your rescue has failed. And now I have both the old man and Princess Syra." "I don't think so," the former weepy woman now said in a clear, sober, determined voice. The man was so surprised by this sudden change in the woman's demeanor that he didn't notice her pulling something out of her side. Something with an ivory handle to it. At that same moment, she bit down on his hand, which held the knife to her throat. He, instantly, let go of her and the knife. Before the blade hit the ground, Rose had spun around, freeing herself, and hitting him in the side of the face with her nunchucks, but not as hard as she would have liked to. He hit the ground and swore in pain. Rose yelled out, "You need to learn how to treat a lady. You slime ball. Especially, if she is royalty." She said this last part with a bit of sarcasm. The 10 men who had stood there dumbfounded by this bit of trickery suddenly got their wits about them and started to attack the red-headed Queen's Knight. Never one to miss a good fight, Robert jumped into the fray, weapon spinning high in the air and coming down upon each of his foes. He finished them off each with a single blow, living up to his old nickname from the previous war, Robert the Reaper. Rose, likewise, showed off her speed and deadly accuracy with her nunchucks, finishing off several men in mere moments. Once the outside thugs were disposed of by the 2 Queen's Knights, Robert grabbed the wounded and dizzy, but still alive, was. Tying him up, he informed the semi-conscious man that he was under arrest for treason, kidnapping, terrorism, and several other charges he didn't care to go into right now. Rose, meanwhile, ran inside to check on Desmond, Duncan, and Clark. Sure enough, her plan had worked. There before her were the Marine Knights, cutting Desmond free and helping the older man to his feet. "You guys okay in here?" she asked. "Oh yeah, no problems here. A few cuts from the glass on the window, but other than that we are all fine," reported Duncan. Clark added, "Yeah, those chumps got nothing on that sea beast we fought. That's for sure." Both Knights and Desmond laughed a little at this inside joke. Rose didn't get it, but was glad everyone was all right. Suddenly, more bells and trumpets could be heard in the distance. The wedding ceremony was over. Godwin and Syra were now husband and wife, and the festivities and reception would be starting soon. Robert brought the still groggy Was into the room, who was still hurting from that blow to the head. Rose walked up to him and slapped him on the same side of the face as she had hit him earlier. "You stupid jerk." She slapped him again. This was supposed to be a happy romantic day. Again, she slapped him. "A happy wedding day." Another slap, "And I missed it because of you and your stupid plans." She slapped him once more. "This beautiful romantic special day." Slap. She wanted to hit him again. But Robert stopped her this time. At this point, the kidnapper was now completely unconscious. Desmond reached down to grab his silver cufflinks off the ground and fastened them onto his coat sleeves. Fixing his hair and tucking back in his shirt, he said in a calm way, "Well, we still haven't missed the party. Let's get going." The 4 knights couldn't help but laugh a little bit at his words as they made their way back into town. Duncan whispered to Clark, "I guess hell does have no fury like a woman scorned. Am I right?" Both knights of Resrel laughed quietly to themselves, making sure that Rose did not overhear them. Ding, 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 dong. The chapel bells rang out for the final time that day. It was now 9 o'clock. Bellies were full, wine glasses were nearly empty, and much merriment was being had by all, particularly at the ambassador's table since their reunion a few hours earlier. Desmond shared the events of that day with his friends. Laszlo felt a great sense of appreciation toward the Marine Knights as well as Rose and Robert. It felt odd to him to be the one grateful to another for being the hero for a change, but he was happy with the outcome and glad to have his friend back safe and sound. Ishan had joined their table earlier that evening during dinner and had many wonderful tales to share with them about a few recent elf sightings he had seen in the woods on a recent hike above the waterfall of Lunas. Before the newlywed couple could have their first dance, Commander Aelin spoke up and the whole banquet hall in the palace grew silent. He said to the whole crowd, "These are the moments that make raising children worth it. When they have grown up and you see the kind of person they have become. Ready to take on the world and all its challenges. And mark my words, you will have many challenges of that, I promise you. But what will make you great rulers is not what difficulties you face, but who you have with you when you face those trials. I pray to the sun, that you know nothing but peace, but if trouble comes, I hope you look to each other for support in the same way I have toward your mother and she toward me." "Hear, hear!" shouted many in the crowd. "Long live the Queen!" said others. While the rest just applauded the excellent toast. Now, Aelin's voice carrying over the crowd once more as they all hushed, now with that said, I was going to wait until after you got back from your honeymoon to tell you. But humor this old man's impatience. I just couldn't wait. While you are off enjoying the lush beaches of Hirschville, I want you two to promise me you'll look around that town and take it all in, because I am giving it to you. It is our wedding gift to you guys. I am giving you the deed to that town and all my holdings of land there. They have been in my family for generations, and I pray that you govern it well, Marcus. Finished the commander with a small tear in his eye. Godwyn bowed his head before the Queen and Commander and thanked them for their great generosity. Syra hugged them both with tears in her eyes at such a generous gift. After a few minutes of silence and a few oohs and ahs from the crowd, Aelin reminded them that this was a party and it was time to dance. With that the band stood to play again. Syra and Godwyn had their first dance as husband and wife. Then, the Queen and Commander followed suit onto the dance floor for the ceremonial waltz. After that, they returned to their seats and the rest of the nobles came to the floor. Laszlo glanced over at Alinda sitting with Rose at the royal table. Judging by Rose's animated body movements, she was telling Alinda about the rescue and how she had to cut her doll's hair, borrowed one of her dresses, and how she had disguised herself as Syra, thus defeating those stupid thugs, freeing Desmond, and how that stupid guy was now nursing his wounds in the palace dungeon under strict guard. Also, Laszlo could hear some older noble at the table next to his, complaining to a rich friend about how his niece, Melise, didn't want to marry the young man he had picked out for her. However, he paid it no attention as his eyes were still on Princess Alinda. Then his gaze turned to another side of the room, where a bunch of young men, obviously single, were trying to dare or convince one of them to go over and ask Alinda to dance. She noticed them, but paid them no attention. She did, however, for a moment, Laszlo noticed make eye contact with him, while Rose was talking. Then, Laszlo remembered her letter, about how she wished for him to spend this evening around her as a means to keep those wealthy and spoiled rich young men away. Ishan and Desmond, who had been talking to each other, looked over at Laszlo and both older men smiled. One said, "You have not, because you ask not. If you want to dance with her, son, you need to ask her." The other added, "Indeed, I bet she's waiting for you. You better go ask her before one of those spoiled hooligans beats you to it." They were right. Laszlo knew it. It's time to stop acting so silly over this. She's just a woman, no different than any of the 1,000 others he had encountered in his nearly half a century of life. No, he corrected himself in his mind, she is not just another woman. With that, the rune bearer stood up, took a drink of his wine, and proceeded to the royal table. As he got in earshot, he heard Alinda saying to Rose, "Of course, I don't care about the dress, and the doll is just a doll. A child's toy. What's important is that Mr. Desmond is safe." A relieved Rose suddenly turned as she saw Laszlo. Likewise, Alinda stopped talking and looked up at him. Laszlo, extending his hand, simply asked, "Would you care to dance, Your Highness?" She looked at Rose, who gestured with her hands, "Go." She took his hand, got up, and they walked out onto the dance floor. The music was slow and the atmosphere was clearly one of romance as many of the couples were holding each other closely, dancing in rhythm to the music. Laszlo pulled Alinda close to him, then began to dance slowly in harmony with the melody, gradually moving to the beat. This was only the second time in his life that he had been to a dance, and at the first one he had not even danced at all. In truth, he had no idea how to dance. Luckily for him, one of the past rune of punishment bearers did know how to dance quite well, Rakgi's dad. He was now using those memories in the rune to their fullest. That, coupled with his natural agility and quick study, made learning the moves to the dance quite easy. But that didn't matter to him right now, because they were so close to each other that he could feel the warmth from her skin and dress. Laszlo saw out of the corner of his eye as they were dancing that group of guys who had been trying to work up the courage to ask the most beautiful woman in the Quendom to dance with them. But now their faces were clearly sullen both with jealousy and anger. Laszlo figured Alinda saw this too, as he heard her chuckle a little bit to herself when she was looking that way during the one part of the song. However, it wasn't just a few jealous suitors who had the couple's attention. Many in the audience, some on the dance floor, and even Queen Elamark had taken notice of the young couple, and their flawless and completely in sync movements on the dance floor. After a few more songs and dancing, they both noticed what an audience they were attracting. The foreign ambassador and a beautiful princess moving in utter harmony. Maybe, we should take a break. We're attracting quite the crowd. Even your sister and brother-in-law are watching us now, suggested Laszlo. Wait, said Alinda in a whisper, can we go somewhere else, instead? Just the two of us? I am quite hot from dancing. Let's go out to the balcony and look at the night sky. I am sure it is very cool out there now. Laszlo liked the idea and gestured to her to lead the way out as he didn't know where to go. As they snuck through the crowd of dancers, a few eyes stayed on them, but most went back to dancing and drinking, assuming the show was over. Alinda was right, the evening air was indeed cool and brisk. They went to the edge of the balcony and looked out over the city. Many lights were still uncharacteristically on, but not surprisingly given how many were still celebrating. Quickly their gaze turned upwards toward the heavens as the early night stars began to show forth. I love coming out here. It's so peaceful. I used to do it all the time when I was little. My dad would bring me here and we would try to count the stars, she said reminiscently. Laszlo looked at her a bit surprised, but added, that's funny, my father used to do the same thing with my sister as well. Really, that is funny, I guess. It's so interesting how much our two nations have in common. She spoke in a soft voice, her head still gazing up at the stars. His childhood, this would be a great chance, she told herself, to finally be able to ask him about himself. She had tried to ask Danya and Desmond about this strange man, but they were not very forthcoming with information as much as she had hoped they would have been. But now here in this place she had him alone and could ask him all her questions at last about him and that rune of his on his left hand. So, they counted stars. Do they still do that together, then? And how about your mom? Do you two do anything fun while they're off counting? A sad look came across Laszlo's face and she regretted asking those questions immediately. But he spoke up anyway, my mom died when I was a baby. So, I really don't remember her, and my dad also passed on a few years ago. So, now it's just me and my older sister. But the two of us try to count them when we can. In fact, we talked about it before I came here to Falena. Alinda felt like she wanted to kick herself for being so careless in her questions. True, she had no way of knowing about his parents, but it was also clear whatever hope she had of asking about his rune just flew away. She didn't want to be insensitive anymore tonight. She was having an amazing time with Laszlo and didn't want to risk any more questions blowing up in her face and ruining the evening. Instead, the conversation changed to other topics like how they both enjoyed the wedding. Plus, Alinda asked about how the wedding ceremonies worked back in the island nations. After this and many other conversation topics about the similarities and differences between their respective countries, it was clear to both of them that the earlier awkward moment had passed and they were now back to enjoying themselves again. Yet, having been outside for nearly an hour now, Alinda was no longer hot. In fact, in her strapless pink dress she was not retaining much heat at all. She put her arms around herself and started to shiver some. Laszlo, realizing this, took off his outer black jacket and placed it around her. Obviously, it was too big for her to wear, but she didn't care, it was warm. The young royal pulled it close to her as if it was something familiar and comforting. They both looked at each other. Their eyes were locked on one another. They just stared at each other under the stars for many minutes and said nothing, but for them it only felt like a few seconds. Alinda, suddenly, had flashbacks to the forest that one awful day, When these same eyes looked into hers and assured her everything was going to be okay and she believed it. He had that same look in his eyes now. She had never known anyone with eyes like his. Once more, they had that same look of protection, comfort, and absolute certainty that everything was going to be all right. Then, Laszlo reached out both his hands for hers in the coat. He moved in close to her, as close as they had been during their dancing. He could again feel her soft chest pressed against his. Her hands were starting to tremble a little, but he knew it wasn't because of the cold. He bent his head slightly down and to the right to her level, as she was slightly shorter than he was. He pursed his lips and began to move them slowly toward hers. She knew what was coming. Her whole body felt weak, but she didn't care. She closed her eyes, wet her lips, and waited for his to touch hers. He could feel her warm breath. Just as their lips made the slightest contact and he was about to move in even closer, the balcony door unexpectedly swung open. Both quickly back away from each other and their gaze turned toward their interloper. It was Amos Barrows. He appeared to be drunk. Hiccup, I was sure the bathroom was around here somewhere. Hiccup. Do you know where I can find the little gentleman's room? Hiccup. I need to pee. He murmured. Alinda, who was now utterly beside herself, said in a very displeased tone, it is down the hall, 3 doors from here. It has a sign on it, you drunken ape. My name isn't Ape, my name is Amos. Hiccup. Excuse me. Princess. With that he quickly hurried to the other side of the balcony and threw up with half his body hanging over the edge. Laszlo looked at Alinda, who had an expression that suggested she might want to go over there and push his other half over the edge as well. Laszlo suggested at this point they go back to the party. Thus, they returned, sadly, as both were now shaking their heads in disbelief. After saying goodbye to everyone they knew, the 3 ambassadors left the party and returned to the rented villa, determined to leave back for East Palace bright and early in the morning. As Laszlo laid in bed that night, he said to himself, what a crazy and interesting day this has been, wedding bells and all. And with that the old hero was soon asleep and his dreams were for the first time in many years very sweet and pleasant.